This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us on Candid Conversations. I am Trever Shirin, joined as always by Dr. Mark Mayfield.
What's up?
And full disclosure, this is an episode that we did film last week, but the audio quality was a little rough. So you may have actually noticed that the episode that we put out last week, there were certain elements of the sound that didn't sound great. We figured out the mic problem, and we're going to attempt to rehash out that conversation on self-soothing today.
Let's try it again. We're going to need to self-soothe ourselves here after doing that one.
I mean, we've talked before about how often we need to, you and I need to go back and listen to episodes that we've put out and just remind ourselves of those conversations. And so it's interesting revisiting a conversation that we had and trying to think back on, okay, what did we say about self-soothing? How have things changed even in the past week on how I view it?
Yeah, and what do we need to learn because we're doing it twice?
Yeah, right.
When
how can we soothe ourselves in this?
When things happen twice, maybe we should listen to ourselves.
And so let's start with a couple definitions.
Yeah.
There seems to be this stigma or this poor conception of the word self-soothing compared to like self-care or self-comforting. What is the other side of self-soothing that makes it not as popular or usable?
I think self-soothing is something that we do when we realize, we don't realize. So it's something we do when we're unhealthy at times, and not always, but I think that's the difference between self-care and self-soothing. Self-soothing is, I'm not doing well, give me a chocolate. I'm not doing well, I'm going to watch some pornography. I'm not doing well, I'm going to drink some alcohol, or I'm going to do some, whatever it is to take that edge off of not doing well, I think is the way I understand self-soothing, where self-care is, hey, I want to make sure I'm doing well.
Yeah.
And so what can we do to maintain or...
So then is self-soothing always a negative, like drugs, sex, alcohol, like those things, the antisocial-esque behaviors, or can it also be some more things that line up with self-care, or is it only bad?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's the motive behind it. Why are you turning to those things? Now, is going home and having a little bit of whiskey and sitting by your fireplace and reading a good book, is that self-soothing or is that self-care?
Self-destruction, obviously. Self-destruction, that's the obvious answer, right?
No, but that sounds like, if it's a colder day, we're sitting out here today, it's August 13th, and it's cloudy and misty, and like that to me is like, let's go get a good book and sit by the fireplace and get a little bit of whiskey and read, right? So
instead we choose to be with you.
Right. You're lucky. But I think that's self-care. But if I go home and say, I've had a really bad day, I've listened to everybody's problems and I don't want to deal with anything anymore, and I drink and drink and drink just so I don't feel, am I soothing? Yes. Is that healthy? No.
So it sounds like there's a bit of timing that makes self-soothing dependent on whether it's beneficial or not, as well as the amount or the duration or the intensity of that thing. So, if we're choosing to drink, one drink is acceptable and can be healthy and has some benefits. One bottle is a different thing entirely.
If you extrapolate that, though, one line of cocaine, is that good? But like 5 is not, or 1
minute of pornography compared to
10 minutes or whatever. Yeah, no. So I think it's especially in a relativistic world that we're in right now. I think it's people will argue that it's based on preference and it's based on all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, there's just some things that aren't good for you that we do to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah.
So
like in high school, I've been pretty open on this show. I self-harmed in high school, and that was very self-soothing for me. I'd come home from a hard day where I had said something that, like, I was embarrassed that I had said that, and so I could self-soothe through a self-harm behavior, but that in no way was a healthy option for me.
Well, no, and I think recognizing why you were doing it was a really good thing. But then replacing that behavior with, like, let's go for a walk, let's go for a run, let's go exercise, let's sit and journal or talk. I think the reasons behind self-soothing are not evil or bad. I think this is part of us being human, but how do we do them in a way that promotes health, promotes well-being, promotes care of self?
So we've done an episode on self-care.
We have.
We're talking about something similar, but a little bit different. And what do you do when you're in the midst of distress, when it feels like everything's not going well, or last week's conversation of you're doing all that you can and it just doesn't seem to be enough? How do we do that? Because to me, it kind of feels like self-care can be more of the lifestyle, and that's what we talk about of, like, you should be hiking in the mountains for 3 hours and things like that. But I think there's a very acute method of self-care that we're talking about that is in the midst of distress. Is that still considered self-care, or is that self-soothing, or is there another word that fits that situation a little bit better?
I want to put a caveat in there for our listeners. This is opinion on both of us. And you can disagree with us. We'd love to have you email us, on candid@mayfieldcounseling.com
Totally.
if you got an opinion on this, because I think this is us just kind of being raw today and wrestling through. I always associate, and maybe this is just how I was brought up or just how I saw the world growing up, but always saw self-soothing as a negative, because it was negating or like numbing or pushing aside things that needed to be dealt with. That's just me. And I think that's kind of how I view it. But it's interesting. As we're having this conversation, I'm wondering, maybe has my view of this for the last almost 38 years been wrong?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, when I hear people talking about children, there is that element of self-soothing that they talk about, and it's spoken of in a very positive way of you want your child to learn to self-soothe. And I think it's interesting that in context of children, it has this positive connotation.
Well, but let's break that down for a second. What do we mean by self-soothe? Like, are they having anxiety and they don't want to sleep in their room, but you're making them, and so they're going to figure out a way to rock themselves to sleep as they're crying by sucking their thumb? That's probably not the best thing, right? And I think we've shown over the years as things have developed and we've gotten more understanding of the child and the psyche of a 0 to 3 year old, right? They shouldn't have to self-soothe.
Yeah.
They need the attachment of their caregiver. And there have been countless books out there that have just, I think, damaged a lot of people, saying, well, they should cry themselves to sleep by the time they're, 3 weeks old or 5 weeks old or 6 weeks old or 8 weeks old. I mean, I remember this book that we went through when we were told to go through I don't remember what it was called, when we first had our first daughter. And I'm reading through it going, this is ludicrous. Like, no, right? But they're all talking about this idea of self-soothing. Well, but really what is in that moment, what is self-soothing? It's them trying to figure out how to care for themselves. And that's not okay for in my mind, for a 0 to 3.
It wouldn't be developmentally appropriate.
At least that's how I see it. Yeah.
Sure. So in this concept of maybe just distress tolerance skills.
Sure. Coping skills. Grit and resiliency skills.
Yeah. What does that look like when, especially in the context of our conversation last week with doing all that you can, where you feel like you're at capacity?
Right.
How do you interact with that situation?
I think that's a good question. I think it's a becoming comfortable, maybe is the right word, with where you're at. Because like we talked about earlier, when you were talking about you're cutting and stuff. I did something wrong. I said something wrong. I felt wrong, or those kinds of things. You were trying to get rid of those feelings. Mm-hmm. Instead, what would have been like if you were to go, because you had the awareness. I mean, you were really good at the awareness piece, mm-hmm. and you've talked a lot about that. Like, I know why I'm feeling this way.
Yeah.
I want it to go away. I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
What would it have been like for you to sit with those things, to begin to develop that resiliency and that distress tolerance?
Yeah.
Instead, escaping or moving aside is kind of what happened. I don't know. I mean,
yeah. Well, that makes me think of a DBT skill called radical acceptance, mm-hmm. That I really appreciate. And it's this concept of totally accepting where you are right now and acknowledging what has been done and you can't change it. And the things that have led to that point are already done. Like, it's all in the past.
Yep.
And you can't control what has already happened. What you can control is what you're doing right now, mm-hmm. and how that impacts the future. And it seems really simple, but it's such a hard concept to be able to master, and it takes a lot of thought work. But I think that's what I hear you saying too, is how do we radically accept where we are right now and how we interact with our space in that moment, mm-hmm. towards greater, I think, I don't know, I kind of don't like the word comfort. I think it's right, but that I feel like that's a couple steps down the road, because I can't imagine being in that point of distress, mm-hmm. and saying like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable now.
Well, I look at I was just talking with one of my colleagues last night after a client, actually, and she brought up this idea of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. And basically it's saying, instead of like pushing away our anxiety and having it as a bad thing, what if we had invited it in and said, hey, let's get to know each other. Mm-hmm. Come on in. I want to become familiar with you. And I do that a lot with my clients of asking them the question, what would it be like to be old friends with your emotions and some of your distress? Yeah. Because when you become old friends with something, you know the ins and the outs, and you know the nuances, and you might not like it, but you're not surprised by it. Right. And so I think in the same way with the radical acceptance piece, the acceptance commitment piece of going, let's just, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. And not it is what it is, let's stay there and be miserable. It is what it is, like, let's accept it. Yeah. Radical acceptance. And then what are our choices?
Yeah, having some agency in the midst of it, where I can't control the past, but I can control now, or manage now, I think is probably a better word.
I can control how I react to now, which is managing, I think. Yeah. But it's a concept that we don't see very often. I mean, I think about, and this is going to ruffle some feathers, but I think about, what happened after Trump became president on college campuses. Mm-hmm. They needed stuffed animal rooms and cry rooms and all this kind of stuff. And it's because we have not taught Generation Z, or in toward the tail end of the millennial generation, we've not taught them these skills of, you know what, you can't control what happens in life. You can get really mad about it and you can throw a tantrum, or you can go, you know what, how do I learn to cope with this kind of stuff? Yeah. But we're placating and pandering and all these kind of things to a generation that doesn't have these skills. Yeah. Now, what does that say about us as parents? Or those kind of things? We've talked about this a lot of kind of the rescue parent, the snowplow parent moving everything hard away, or the helicopter parent rescuing, and I think it's a disservice to our kids. So I think we're coming full circle. Then is when is the right age for them to sit with these things and figure out some growth, resiliency, and grit? Is that self-soothing? Yeah.
Well, that sounds like an excellent question that could probably be answered by a previous episode of Candid Conversations, talking about Erickson's stages of development. Right. Encourage you to check it out.
nice plug there. But that's what I wonder. Is it a 8, 9, 10, 12 years old? I think everything is age. Do things age appropriately. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think you should be teaching a 3, 4, or 5-year-old. Good luck, figure it out. Right. But are there things that once they hit 4 or 5 and they have some agency and they have some understanding of the bigger picture, how do we help teach them these things? Yeah. But letting a baby cry at 3 months until they don't don't think it's a good idea.
Listen to your breaking heart and just go
Well,
them.
I always say you can never hold a baby too much, in my opinion. But there's people out there that will, spit
Everybody
their coffee
has an
out.
opinion.
I know everybody's got an opinion.
Well, and I think something that's interesting about this concept of kind of starting fresh in a moment of distress and deciding to take your agency, like obviously in stories, that one of the reasons they're so beautiful is because they can be interpreted in so many ways, and we can see them through so many different lenses. And I can think of, a couple times in movies where somebody has done something so stupid because they couldn't let go of the past. They couldn't say, okay, yep, that did happen. I can't change that happened, and the action that I'm about to take is not going to make it better.
Right.
It's actually going to make it worse.
Right.
And oftentimes we praise the heroes who are able to reflect in that way and say, I can't control what just happened. I can't change that happened. What I can do is make better decisions now that are going to help me towards my goal.
That would be a boring movie.
It would be a boring. Well, actually, I don't think so, because I think oftentimes we don't even acknowledge that that's the process that's happening.
That makes sense.
I'm reading through The Two Towers again right now, and I'm sorry, I always bring up Lord of the Rings.
It's okay. It's a safe place.
But there's a point when essentially Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli are chasing after Merry and Pippin, who have been kidnapped by orcs, and they meet up with Gandalf, who says, hey, the hobbits are fine. They're actually on a course that was set for them, and it's okay. I need you to go back to Rohan and start this other storyline. And Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have ran 40 leagues, so what's that, 70 miles or so, something like that.
A long way.
That's bad math, but you get the point. I think it's 120 miles, whatever. So they've been running and doing this, and they come to a point when their goal was, we need to get Merry and Pippin because we lost them. And then they acknowledge, okay, we can't save them. They're already okay, maybe. We don't know for sure, but we think they're okay. We think that they can handle it on their own. And we have something else that we need to do that is going to further the cause. And being able to do that seems so heroic, because it's that same process of, I can't control it, so I'm going to do what I can in this moment.
Well, it's the bigger picture too.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's the bigger picture. We get so burdened by our own stuff that we can't pop our head up and see what's going on, in the bigger picture. So I think it's good. I like that.
That different perspective is huge. And oftentimes, something that has struck me before, when we talk about individuals who are suicidal, and we'll have an episode about that soon, where how to talk to somebody in that situation. But one of the biggest things we can do is to offer options,
right?
Because when you're in that mindset, suicide's the only option.
Well, it's because all we can see.
Right. And I just think it's crazy how powerful different perspective and a wider perspective can be.
Absolutely. Well, I challenge our listeners to kind of think back on kind of the things that they're doing to make themselves feel better in their life right now. We might get into this rhythm that having a drink at night is okay, but what's the purpose behind it? Having a pint of ice cream might be okay, but what's the purpose behind it? I think it's being mindful. And there's this term that one of my professor friends uses of when she's working with individuals that are recovering from eating disorders, this idea of mindful eating. Dr. Leaf talks about it in her books as well. It's just being mindful of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if it needs to change, then change without guilt or shame. But I think in our lives too, let's be mindful of our choices, be mindful of our reactions and our interactions. And if they turn to a self-soothing nature, again, no guilt or shame, but if you're mindful of it, then you have the wherewithal to change it. And I think that's where good friendships come in, or good mentorship, or individuals that can speak those things into your life are important.
Yeah. If you want more information about mindful eating, you can go to Mayfield Counseling's Facebook page and check out the Monday Minute. You can also find those episodes on the Mayfield Counseling Center's YouTube channel. And we have an episode with Stephanie Tinney and Julia Watson where they talk about what is mindful eating and walking you through that process.
That's good.
Excellent. We will see you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.